It's a bloom that crowned ancient gods with a scent that seduced Renaissance angels and built perfume empires worth billions. But follow this fragrance trail through history, and you'll uncover secrets rotting just beneath that beautiful bloom. Child labor exploitation in Egypt's Nile Delta, climate-flooded fields swallowing Indonesian farms whole, Chinese pickers dumping fortunes in protest, invasive thickets smothering New Zealand forests, the list goes on. Who knew that one of the world's most romantic flowers hid a history this dark? I'm Megan Brame, and on this episode of The History of Plants, we'll trace the meteoric rise of the Jasminum genus, better known as jasmine. From sacred bathhouses and temple garlands in ancient Persia to the jasmine-drenched perfume fields of Grasse, France, this is a story of beauty and the hidden crimes that keep its fragrance flowing. When you trace jasmine's history as far as the evidence allows, you'll end up in a blurry spot on the map. From a botanical perspective, jasmine belongs to the genus Jasminum, a group of fragrant shrubs and vines in the olive family. Botanists recognize about 200 species in this genus, most of them native to the tropical and warm temperate regions of Eurasia, Africa, and parts of Oceania. Originally, I had planned to focus solely on Jasminum officinale, the common or poet's jasmine, but there are just so many twists and turns throughout history that don't really specify which variety they're talking about, so I'm going to just go for the entire Jasminum genus and call it a day. Also, to add even more of a clusterfluff, there are plants in other families known as jasmine, including this guy, Tricholospermum jasminides, or Confederate jasmine. But I've got to cut this script off somewhere or it'll never get done, so we're just sticking to the true jasmine types. Within that broader Jasminum family, modern phylogeography suggests that the wild ancestors of Jasminum officinale diverged somewhere in or near the Himalayan region roughly 2 to 3 million years ago. By the time societies began recording plants in ways that archaeologists can recover, jasmine is already in use across a wide belt, from the Caucasus through Western and Southern Asia, and its delicate flowers almost never preserve well. So, instead, archaeologists usually look for hints of its origin where they can: degraded pollen, microscopic plant remains, aromatic residues with jasmine-type compounds, and later descriptions that line up with what is known about the plant today. What those later descriptions and historical syntheses agree on is that by around 1000 BCE, jasmine is already deeply embedded in the sacred and elite culture of ancient Persia. Here, we see the first origins of its name. Persians called it Yasemin, which some say means gift from God, but I couldn't find a ton of peer-reviewed evidence to back that. Regardless, in Persian culture, this flower holds special status. It's offered in temples, woven into garlands, and infused into oils and bath preparations reserved for the most powerful elite. As trade and ideas move east and south, it slips into the world of early Vedic and later classical India, where it stops being only a status symbol and becomes part of everyday ritual. By roughly 1500 through 500 BCE, a few jasmines show up in Sanskrit with names like Mulika and are described as fragrant white flowers used in offerings, poetry, and early medicine. Most likely, these are actually Arabian jasmine, Jasminum sambac, or night-blooming jasmine, Nicanthes arbitristis, which isn't a true jasmine, but is still amazing. Night-blooming jasmine, known as Parijata, is tied to Lord Krishna, who is worshipped as the 8th incarnation of Lord Vishnu. In devotional texts, Krishna's teeth are often described as glistening jasmine flowers, and blooming jasmine is the scent that supposedly turns his thoughts towards enjoying love. It tracks with how people actually experience the plant: small, delicate, and absolutely overwhelming when it's in full bloom at night. One of the clearest visual examples of this shows up in a famous illustration of the Gita Govinda, the 12th century poem by Jayadeva, about the relationship between Krishna and his consort, the goddess Radha. In a 17th century painting of the lovers in a forest, jasmine is everywhere, its white flowers hanging in garlands above their heads and stud the vegetation around them, turning the whole space into a world of scent and desire. A jasmine flower also shows up in another major Sanskrit epic, the Ramayana, where it does slightly different symbolic work. In the Sundarakanda, the 5th book of the epic Sita, the wife of Rama is described as having teeth that, quote, are evenly smooth and their tips are like jasmine buds. We also see a jasmine associated with Kamadeva, the Hindu god of erotic love and personification of Kama, pleasure or desire, a la the Kama Sutra. Kamadeva has a sugarcane bow strung with threads of bees and 5 arrows, each tipped with a different flower. mango flower, jasmine, blue lotus, white lotus, and ashoka blossom, all of which can evoke different moods on the person who's struck. By this point, jasmine is turning into a serious commodity. Fields of what later Tamil sources call Jathi Mali, most likely Jasminum grandiflorum, appear around Madurai and are cultivated specifically to feed the enormous and ever-growing demand for garlands and offerings. These blooms are picked at dawn, rushed to markets, and weighed out for temple offerings, weddings, and hair adornments, turning jasmine into a full-time livelihood long before the French fragrance industry ever hears about it. As jasmine rides along trade routes into Southeast Asia, it keeps picking up new symbolic jobs. In Indonesia, Melati Putih, usually a form of Jasminum sambac, becomes an unofficial national flower. It stands for purity, love, and respect, and it shows up everywhere from wedding headdresses to state ceremonies. During the Indonesian independence period of 1945 through 1949, writers and musicians used melati as a metaphor for sacrifice and remembrance, always fragrant flower standing in for people who didn't live to see the country that they were fighting for. In Thailand, it's called dak mali, though that more commonly refers to jasmine rice. Here, the flower steps into a more intimate role, representing a mother's love, and garlands of it are given by children to their mothers on Mother's Day. Across much of the Islamic world, jasmine's Persian name remains Yasemin or Yasaman, depending on the dialect, but its cultural role stays remarkably consistent. It's planted in courtyard gardens along walkways so that when flowers open in the evening, their scent drifts through family gatherings. In many of these traditions, jasmine becomes a symbol of beauty and memory, the smell that pulls you straight back to a specific house, specific night, or a specific person. In China, jasmine gets yet another twist. Later historical and botanical sources describe a jasmine known as Yeli Shayang, often translated as the fragrance that comes at night, which is used both ornamentally and in rituals. Over time, Chinese tea artisans started scenting tea with jasmine blossoms, letting the flowers infuse green or white tea with their perfume. In the Philippines and parts of the broader Austronesian world, jasmine again shows up in garlands and religious life, often under the name Sampaguita, typically considered to be Jasminum sambac. Garlands are offered at altars, hung on religious statues, and given to honored guests. And that's just the east. Jasmine also moves west, quietly slipping onto ships and caravans into the hands of people who know exactly how much power hides in something people feel they can't live or pray without. By the 9th and 10th centuries, jasmine was already woven into the design language of Islamic gardens, from Baghdad to Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled region of the Iberian Peninsula. Arabs brought jasmine to Spain during the Moorish occupation, and wealthy families grew it in their gardens, called riads, which were enclosed courtyard gardens designed around the idea of paradise on earth. Jasmine vines were trained along walls, planted near fountains, and positioned so that when the flowers open at dusk, their scent moves throughout the entire household. You'd think maybe it would feature heavily in Greek or Roman mythology because it's so beautiful and fragrant. All we really see is a few mentions where the flower is considered sacred to Aphrodite. In Egypt and across North Africa, jasmine becomes deeply embedded in local agriculture and culture, appearing in Arabic poetry and urban gardens along the Nile. Cleopatra is believed to have been a big fan of the flower, reportedly including it in her baths and using the scent of jasmine and frankincense to fill the air before her ship reached the port where she would meet Mark Antony in 41 BCE. Plutarch writes about this in his Life of Julius Caesar, saying, quote, "that perfumes diffused themselves from the vessel to the shore, which was covered with multitudes, part following the galley up the river on either bank, part running out of the city to see the sight." Around the same time, jasmine is moving along the Indian Ocean trade routes to the Swahili coast of East Africa, where it becomes known as Asumani, a name that's somewhat reminiscent of its Persian origins, Yasemin. Here, jasmine becomes tied to feminine beauty and gendered cultural practices. The flower is traditionally reserved for married women, and a house that smells of jasmine is considered a noble one. Women and young girls pick the flowers at dawn or before dusk when the buds are tightly closed to preserve their fragrance. These flowers are used to perfume spaces, body oils, and beds, but they're also woven into elegant floral adornments called kishada, kikuba, and koja. Each bride would go off to meet her new husband with a kikuba pinned on her, and kojas, garlands draped over the necks of brides and grooms at weddings, would become a central part of ceremonial life. When the Normans conquered Sicily in the 11th century, they inherited those Moorish gardens along with the people who knew how to keep them running. By the 12th century, Arab Norman kings were building pleasure gardens packed with citrus, palms, and jasmine, blending Islamic horticultural knowledge with European court culture. This is when jasmine gets its first true European foothold and a cultural handoff that happens so smoothly, most people don't even notice the plant crossing over. From Sicily, jasmine starts creeping north to the Italian mainland, where it stops being a royal garden novelty and begins appearing in literature as shorthand for a specific type of wealth and escape. Between 1349 and 1353, Giovanni Boccaccio writes The Decameron, a collection of stories told by 10 young aristocrats who fled Florence during the Black Death. The frame narrative describes the villa where the 10 aristocrats flee to escape the plague, a garden with paths, walled in with roses, white and red, and jasmine, providing shade and fragrance throughout. Later in the collection, luxury goods, including fragrant oils and water, appear in stories of deception and social climbing, showing how scented products had become markers of wealth by the mid-14th century. By the early 16th century, jasmine had reached the French court. Between 1503 and 1508, Queen Anne of Brittany commissioned the most gorgeous illuminated manuscript called the Grand Ur, a book of hours decorated with hundreds of botanical illustrations in the margins. Among them is what's believed to be the earliest record of jasmine in Western Europe. A few decades later, in 1548, the English botanist and physician William Turner published The Names of Herbs, one of the first systematic plant guides written in English. Turner notes that jasmine groweth communely in gardens about London, which tells us two things. First, that jasmine has naturalized enough in England to be common, and second, that the plant is no longer rare enough to be worth dedicating much detail to. By the mid-1500s, jasmine's just part of the landscape. In the Americas, different species of jasmine make their way across the Atlantic, being planted in gardens in the Caribbean and Florida, eventually escaping their cultivation and going native. Some find their way into hoodoo traditions, where the flower becomes known poetically as moonlight on the grove. It's used in hoodoo magic to help people overcome their fears and achieve peace, balance, and tranquility, and in hoodoo folk medicine to relieve muscle spasms and contractions, increasing fertility and sexual performance. The flower is said to bring prophetic dreams, confidence, compassion, and grace. It's ruled by the moon and the element of water, appearing in a variety of spells and offerings. Jasmine is also sacred to the Yoruba Orishas Yemaya and Pambagira, and is associated with the voodoo queen Marie Laveau. Oh, and if unraveling hidden histories behind everyday plants is your thing, you should definitely subscribe. But it's when the plant reaches Grasse, a small town in southeastern France, that it truly takes the center stage. In the 16th and 17th century, the town was known for leather tanning, specifically glove making. But one major problem of tanned leather is that it smells awful, and the wealthy clients, shockingly, want gloves that don't reek. So Grasse tanners started perfuming their products with local flowers like lavender, roses, and eventually jasmine. By the 1700s, the perfume side of the business had completely overtaken the glove industry, and Grasse reinvented itself as the fragrance capital of Europe. Jasmine becomes Grasse's signature crop, and the town develops a highly specialized system for extracting its scent. The flowers have to be picked in the morning by skilled workers very carefully because bruising triggers indole release, turning petals pinkish brown and ruining the scent. Pickers work quickly, plucking blooms by hand and rushing them to processing facilities before the scent fades. Once inside the processor, the flowers go through a method called solvent extraction, which produces jasmine absolute. The end product is a thick, concentrated oil that captures the essence of the flower. And here's the thing. There's a reason perfumers couldn't just walk away from jasmine and just find a cheaper flower or a simpler supply chain. Because hidden inside those delicate white petals is a chemical cocktail that is so precisely calibrated to human neurology that even today, with all of our synthetic alternatives, we still can't fully replicate it. The secret was in the molecules themselves, compounds that hijack memory, trigger desire, and in some cases communicate danger across species. In 1957, Swiss chemist Edouard de Mol was working at the fragrance company Firmenich in Geneva when he isolated a compound from Egyptian Jasminum grandiflorum that would change the industry. He called it methyl jasminate, and it was the first time anyone had captured jasmine's molecular signature in pure form. What de Mol didn't know yet was that he had discovered one of nature's most sophisticated alarm systems, a chemical weapon that plants use to survive. Jasminates are ubiquitous in the plant world, acting as distress signals for plants throughout the planty kingdom. When a plant is attacked by caterpillars, aphids, or fungal infections, it floods its tissues with jasminates, which trigger the production of defensive compounds like toxins, enzyme inhibitors, and volatile oils that warn neighboring plants to prepare for invasion. The scent that we find so intoxicating is the plant screaming for help, and like the little sickos we are, fell in love with it anyway. Inside those white petals lies a pharmaceutical cabinet full of curiosities. Across the Jasminum genus, researchers have cataloged bioactive powerhouses, terpenoids for signature scents, flavonoids as pigments and antioxidants, phenolic acids against cellular damage, nitrogen-packed alkaloids with medicinal kicks, sugar-bound glycosides stored for emergencies, astringent mouth-drying tannins, growth-regulating steroids, fragrant coumarins that can also thin blood, plus bitter erodial glycosides and secoirhidoids, which are used to deter herbivores. The essential oil alone packs over 100 volatile cocktails like benzyl acetate for sweet top notes, linalool for lifting what's known in the perfume industry as the floral heart, and jasmine adding that seductive depth, each layer pulling you deeper into jasmine's spell. But there's one compound that makes jasmine unforgettable: indole. Paradoxically, it's the same molecule that gives feces its smell, but in tiny amounts, it adds a seductive warmth that makes the perfume feel full. It's that complexity that makes jasmine impossible to fake. Synthetic chemists can replicate individual compounds, more on that in part 4, but they can't recreate the living, breathing conversation between molecules that shifts as the flower opens, ages, and dies. Modern research has only deepened jasmine's mystique. Over the past 2 decades, scientists have documented pharmacological benefits that ancient healers understood but couldn't prove. Jasmine extracts show potent antioxidant activity, with phenolic compounds scavenging free radicals and protecting cells from oxidative stress. They demonstrate antimicrobial effects against bacteria that causes staph infections, E. coli outbreaks, and even methicillin-resistant strains that laugh at conventional antibiotics. Jasmine also addresses the collateral damage those now dead pathogens have caused. When the body fights infection or injury, inflammation is the immune system's first response. It floods chemical signals that can turn from protective to destructive if left unchecked. That's where jasmine's anti-inflammatory properties come in. Through cytokine modulation, which is the method the body uses to regulate messenger proteins that control the immune response, jasmine compounds tell the immune system to calm down, reducing swelling and tissue damage without shutting down defenses entirely. Recent research also shows some serious doozies in the protective biology sphere. Studies on Jasminum sambac extracts show that they can induce apoptosis, program cell death in tumor cells, inhibiting growth without the collateral damage of traditional chemotherapy. A 2024 study on Jasmine officinale confirmed significant anti-diabetic characteristics, with leaf extracts lowering blood glucose and enhancing insulin sensitivity through antioxidant mechanisms. Other species show hepatoprotective effects, shielding the liver from toxins and gastroprotective properties that heal ulcers. But perhaps the most human effect is the one jasmine has on mood. Essential oils from jasmine flowers reduce cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and lower sympathetic nervous system activity. In controlled studies, participants exposed to jasmine scent reported feeling calmer, more alert, and more positive. The compounds responsible, quercetin, jasmine, and the volatile benzyl derivatives, cross the blood-brain barrier and interact with neurotransmitter systems in ways that researchers are still mapping. The same molecules that protect the plant from predators somehow soothe the human nervous system too. But there's a darker side to all of these benefits. Quantity. The math is brutal. It takes roughly 6 to 8 million flowers to yield just 1 kilogram of concentrate, which is then extracted to produce around 500 grams of absolute. Perfumery, science, research, everything needs substantial quantities of these blooms, and we don't really talk much about how or where that comes from. So by the mid-20th century, when jasmine had become industrialized, it was transformed from a secret flower to an assembly line product. And the people who made that transformation possible, they were invisible, picking flowers in the dark, working for pennies, building an empire they'd never profit from. Jasmine's had a hell of a history, but all of that was about to be absolutely dwarfed by its journey through the 20th century. In 1921, Ernest Beau and Coco Chanel released one of the world's most iconic fragrances, Chanel No. 5, using jasmine absolute and claiming that around 1,000 flowers go into each 15 milliliter bottle. To keep that formula alive, the fragrance industry needed more than chemists. It needed scale. By the 1800s, gross production levels were already falling behind global demand, so fields sprang up in the Nile Delta, southern India, and parts of Indonesia. Today, Grasse is still considered the producer of the highest quality jasmine and is still the main source for Chanel, but for everything else, most of that jasmine comes from India and Egypt. By the mid-20th century, Shubra Belula, a small village around 97 kilometers north of Cairo, had been transformed by jasmine. Hussein A. Fakhri and his father introduced large-scale jasmine planting there, and over time, the village became the heart of Egypt's jasmine industry. Today, it processes around 2,500 tons of blossoms per season and is responsible for more than half of the world's jasmine production, with most of its 257 acres of farmland planted entirely with jasmine. Drive through Shubra Belula during harvest season, which runs from June to December, and you might think nothing special is happening. Before sunset, the fields look just like any other patch of green, with just a few scattered white blooms. But wait a few hours, and everything changes. The jasmine grown there is a night-blooming flower. It evolved to be pollinated by moths rather than bees, so its buds open after dark and release their strongest scent between midnight and dawn. When that fragrance spills across the fields, villagers head into the darkness to collect it. Pickers start working around 3 a.m. and finish by 9 a.m. because after sunrise, unpicked blossoms lose their essence and become unusable. The flowers must be picked carefully one by one to keep their oils intact. Press too hard and they bruise, wait too long and they wilt. To fill a single kilogram of blossoms, a worker has to pick between 4,000 and 6,000 individual flowers. As I said in the last section, to produce 1 kilogram of Jasmine Absolute, the thick, concentrated oil perfumers need, factories require about 1 ton of fresh blossoms. That's roughly 6 million flowers, all picked by hand in the dark. And who does this work? Everyone. Men, women, the elderly, and children as young as 7 years old. The harvest is their only real source of cash, and so everyone has to contribute. Families plan their weddings around jasmine season because that's when they finally have enough income to cover big expenses. Their wages are painfully low. Pickers earn 30 Egyptian pounds, roughly 63 cents in the US, for every kilogram of blossoms they collect. An average picker gathers around 3 kilograms per night, making roughly 90 pounds or $1.90 a day. Meanwhile, the fragrance houses that buy those blossoms turn them into luxury products sold for hundreds of dollars a bottle. And that dependence runs both ways. The global perfume industry is still hooked on real Jasmine Absolute because no synthetic has fully replaced it. You can approximate the scent with lab-made molecules like hedonone, but without at least a drop of the real thing, the fragrance falls flat. So, the world's most famous perfumers quietly rely on villages like Shubra Belula to keep their formulas alive, even as the people picking remain invisible to the consumers who wear them. In 2020, that system almost collapsed. When COVID-19 hit and demand from perfumers dropped, growers suddenly had nowhere to send their nightly harvests. For a crop that has to be processed within hours, there's no such thing as waiting it out. That's when Fakhri's factory unveiled a breakthrough they had been working on since the early 2000s, a method of producing jasmine essential oil by steam distillation, something that many industry books and experts had claimed could not be done. The new technique used organic certified petroleum-free solvents and opened up a different market, the aromatherapy sector, just in time to keep farmers selling their blossoms through the crisis. But the labor conditions didn't change. Families still wake up at 3 a.m. because they still depend on a crop that paid them almost nothing. The crisis isn't just Egyptian, though. In China's Guangxi and Yunnan provinces, jasmine pickers faced their own breaking point. In 2025, when prices crashed below 2 yuan per kilogram, under 30 U.S. cents, due to oversupply and lost exports, farmers dumped harvested blossoms into ditches and markets. It was a public revolt against labor costs outstripping earnings. Indonesia faces its own jasmine apocalypse. In central Java's lowlands, coastal erosion and surging tides from climate change swallow flower fields whole, leaving growers like those in the Pati district vulnerable as shorelines retreat and saltwater poison soil. Torrential 2025 floods across Sumatra and Java, exacerbated by deforestation, have displaced millions, destroyed rice paddies, jasmine's neighbor crop, and threatened floral livelihoods with record rainfall and landslides. Elsewhere, jasmine is misbehaving in a different way. In places like New Zealand, species such as jasmine polyanthum have jumped the garden wall and become invasive, smothering native vegetation and climbing over forests that never evolved to handle them. The same tenacity that made jasmine such a successful crop, fast growth, tolerance of pruning, and an ability to scramble over anything turns into a botanical colonizer when it escapes cultivation. However, tides are changing. In Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, jasmine growers are forming farmer-produced organizations and cooperatives to bypass middlemen, enabling direct sales, better price negotiation, and fairer wages through collective marketing and value addition like oil extraction. These efforts produce sustainable practices, including natural farming without chemicals and small-scale distilleries, boosting incomes while reducing post-harvest losses and dependency on volatile night markets. Daytime harvesting has been gaining traction in some areas to improve worker conditions, supported by improved infrastructure and extension services. Meanwhile, biotech labs are engineering yeast and bacteria to produce jasmine-like aromatic compounds through precision fermentation, creating chemically identical notes without harvesting a single petal. Companies use gene editing to recreate molecules like methyl jasminate for jasmine scents, slashing costs and environmental impact compared to traditional extraction methods that use tons of flowers. It hasn't fully nailed the scent profile yet, but this synthetic biology shift shows immense promise that allows scalable production of complex terpenes and esters, transforming perfumery towards sustainability. Globalization reshapes jasmine traditions too. Elaborate Swahili kojas, once fresh garlands of honor for brides, now sometimes yields to cash garlands pinned to wedding outfits. Intricate jasmine floral adornments, from Indian Jati Mali headdresses to Indonesian melati crowns, increasingly use artificial versions sold for permanence, preserving cultural rituals without the wilting waste. And still, jasmine refuses to let go of our imagination. Different species are the national flowers of Indonesia, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Tunisia, where it also became the symbol of the 2011 Tunisian Revolution, also known as the Jasmine Revolution or the Jasmine Spring. In Syria, the city of Damascus is named the City of Jasmine, its summer air thick with the scent of vines climbing over courtyard walls. In Iran and Shia traditions, they're associated with Fatima al-Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. Across the Pacific, in Hawaii, jasmine sambac, or as it's known there, bukkake, perfumes, leis, and love songs. In pop culture, the name jasmine still evokes sensuality and exoticism, from Disney princesses to perfume ads. So where does all of that leave this plant? Right in the middle of a global push and pull. Jasmine is sacred and overworked, medicinal and exploited, ordinary and exalted. While some jasmine species, like the lemon-scented and Parker's jasmine, are considered critically endangered due to habitat loss, key commercial species thrive through intensive cultivation. Jasminum grandiflorum powers perfume industries via plantations in India and North Africa, bolstered by in vitro micropropagation to meet pharmaceutical and fragrance demands. Jasminum sambac and Jasminum officinale flourish in vast fields from Egypt to Southeast Asia, where global growers are ensuring abundance through hand harvesting, selective pruning, and varietal cloning for weddings, teas, and exports. Jasmine's story doesn't end in shadows, but continues to bloom with possibility. From being hailed as a staple in Cleopatra's seduction toolkit to its place as a powerhouse for modern luxury, jasmine isn't going away anytime soon, because it continues to capture our imagination and calm us with its iconic aroma. So if you're feeling stressed by everything going on in the world and need a break from the anxiety, take a whiff of jasmine and let that powerful chemical profile create a moment of peace, all for you. I'm Megan Brain. Thank you for joining me on another episode of The History of Plants. Jump into the commentary episode on Patreon to hear what didn't make it, or if you're ready for another story of obsession, rarity, and the dangerous lengths people will go to possess beauty, watch my episode on orchids, the flower that sparked a hunting craze so intense it nearly drove the species to extinction and turned collectors into criminals. Until next time, greenies, stay curious and don't forget to flourish.